9 people were in that bar the night it happened. 9 people watched a man drag a woman by her collar toward the door. 9 people heard her scream. 9 people did nothing. Then a 10th person stepped forward, and the fallout would tear through 4 different worlds: Koreatown, the Eastside, the courthouse, and the quiet network of safe houses hidden in between, like a match dropped in a hallway soaked with gasoline. They called it the 60-second moment. The night a young Korean boss with no reason to care chose to care anyway. The night the most disciplined criminal mind in Koreatown threw away every rule he'd ever followed for a woman he didn't even know. But what people don't talk about, what they're afraid to say out loud, is what it cost him, what it cost her, what it cost a woman who had nothing to do with any of it and paid with everything. Lawson thought Samantha belonged to him. Ryung proved she didn't. And the war that followed burned everything in between. 3 restraining orders, 2 violated, 1 woman with nowhere left to run. Until a rainy Tuesday night, a Koreatown bar, and a man who took 1 step forward. This is how it started. Before we go any further, if this story already has your attention, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button right now. Stories like this take weeks to research and write. Your sub is what keeps them coming. And trust me, what's coming in this one is going to stay with you long after it's over. Now let's get into it. Samantha could tell what kind of night it would be by the sound of the engine. If Lawson's truck rumbled slow into the driveway, tires crunching gravel at an easy pace, he'd eaten. He'd had a decent day. She might get silence. Silence was a gift. But if the engine came fast, brakes hard, door slam, keys hitting the counter like a verdict, she had about 4 seconds to read his eyes before the first words landed. And the words always landed before the hands did. 3 years of reading engines and footsteps, and the weight of a man's breathing in a dark hallway. 3 years of learning the architecture of someone else's rage. That's the thing people don't understand about surviving someone like Lawson. Samantha wasn't weak. She was the opposite. She'd developed a survival intelligence so sharp she could predict the next 3 hours of her life from the sound of a truck door closing. She knew which cabinet he opened first when he was drinking angry versus drinking sad. She knew the difference between the silence that meant he was cooling down and the silence that meant the worst was still loading. That's not fear, that's mastery, a terrible, heartbreaking kind of mastery that no one should ever have to develop. 3 restraining orders filed in 3 years. The first lasted 11 days. Lawson showed up at her job, stood by her car, didn't touch her, just smiled. The law said 200 feet. He stood at 201 and waved. The second he didn't pretend to respect. 2 in the morning, banging on her apartment door until the neighbors called police. Officers came, told him to cool off. Left. Lawson locked the door behind them, turned to Samantha and said, "You see, nobody's coming for you." The third was denied. The judge looked at her over his reading glasses and said, "Ma'am, at some point the court has to ask whether these filings are being made in good faith." She didn't file a 4th. Her sister Cynthia had taken the kids 2 weeks earlier, not because she wanted to, because Samantha begged her. She couldn't let her Barbies hear what happened behind that bedroom door anymore, couldn't let her 4-year-old daughter ask why Mommy's arm was in a sling again. Giving up her children was the thing that broke her, not Lawson's fists, not his words. The morning she watched Cynthia's car pull away with both car seats in the back, that was the sound that would live inside her chest forever. On a Tuesday night in October, Lawson passed out on the couch after his 3rd bottle. Samantha put on her jacket, took nothing, no phone, no purse, no plan. She walked out into the rain. 6 blocks, then 10, then she stopped counting. Sneakers soaked through, jacket useless. She didn't know where she was going, she just knew she couldn't go back. And then through the rain and the blur of streetlights she saw it, a warm glow, a neon sign red and gold buzzing faintly in the wet air, a door. She pushed it open. But what Samantha didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that the man sitting in the back office of that bar had spent his entire life building walls to keep people like her out. Not because he didn't care, because the last time he cared, it almost destroyed him. She was about to walk straight through every wall he had. The bar was called Miso, small, warm, dark wood paneling, low amber lights, a jukebox in the corner playing a slow Korean ballad, the kind of song that sounds like remembering something you've already lost. Mostly empty, a couple at a booth near the window, an older man at the far end of the bar nursing a glass of soju, and behind the counter, a woman with sharp eyes, red lipstick and tattoos peeking out from under rolled sleeves. Kristen. She looked at Samantha, soaking wet, mascara streaked, eyes holding that particular kind of emptiness that isn't really empty at all, but is so full of pain there's no room left for expression, and she didn't ask a single question. Corner booth, I'll bring you something warm. Samantha sat. The leather was cracked but soft. The booth was tucked into the back of the bar, away from the window, away from the door, hidden, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Samantha felt something she almost didn't recognize. Safe. Kristen brought her kimchi jjigae, spicy, rich steam rising off the bowl like a small promise, a towel for her hair, a cup of barley tea. You don't have to talk, Kristen said. You don't have to explain anything, you just have to eat. Samantha's hands shook when she picked up the spoon. Somewhere between the first sip and the third, she started to cry. Quiet tears, the kind that come when your body finally realizes it's allowed to stop performing. Kristen didn't hover. She went back behind the bar, wiped glasses, kept one eye on Samantha and one on the door. Because Kristen knew something most people didn't. She knew that women with that look are usually being followed. An hour passed, the soup was finished, the tea was cold. Samantha was staring at the wall, thinking about Cynthia, about her Barbies, about whether she had the strength to start over with nothing. Then the front door swung open. Rain blew in sideways, and with it Lawson. 6'2", 240 pounds, veins in his neck like bridge cables, eyes scanning the room with the focused intensity of a man who'd been driving through every street, checking every bar, every gas station, every corner she might try to hide. Behind him Randy, shorter, wider, arms folded, blocking the door like it was his job, because it was. Lawson's eyes found Samantha in the corner booth. He smiled. There she is. He crossed the room in 4 steps, grabbed a fistful of her jacket collar, yanked her up from the booth like she weighed nothing. Her hip hit the table, the teacup shattered on the floor. You think you can just leave? His voice was low, controlled, the voice he used when he wanted her to know the real pain was coming later, in private. He dragged her toward the door. 9 people in that bar, 9 people watched, 9 people heard her sneakers scraping the floor as she tried to find her footing. Nobody moved. And then a door opened in the back hallway. And Ryung stepped out. He wasn't big, that's the first thing everyone noticed. Ryung was 5'9", lean, clean-shaven, 26 years old with the posture of someone who had never once needed to prove he belonged in any room. Black shirt, black slacks, no jewelry, no visible tattoos. Nothing about his appearance said danger. Everything about his energy did. He didn't rush, didn't raise his voice, didn't ball his fists. He walked out of that back office, stopped 10 feet from Lawson and stood still, hands at his sides, eyes level. And the room changed. Kristen would later describe it as the air going solid, like gravity shifted, like the temperature dropped 5 degrees in a single breath. Lawson still had Samantha by the collar. Her feet were barely touching the ground. He turned toward this stranger and almost laughed. Mind your business, Bruce Lee. Ryung didn't flinch, didn't blink. He took 1 step forward. Just one. And Lawson let go. Not because of the step, because of what was behind it. There's a difference between a man who might hurt you and a man who has already decided exactly what he's going to do to you and is giving you 3 seconds to change the math. Lawson had spent his whole life being the most dangerous person in every room. He recognized the feeling of no longer being that. It was brief, a flicker in his eyes, fear. Samantha stumbled, caught herself on a bar stool. Kristen was already moving toward her. Lawson straightened up, rebuilt his chest. You don't know who you're playing with. Ryung spoke for the first time, low, calm, almost soft. She's not leaving with you. 4 words, no threat, no posture, no negotiation, just a fact stated the way someone might say the sun comes up in the morning. Randy shifted at the door, his hand moved toward his waistband, and then he stopped, because 2 men had appeared in the hallway behind Ryung, Gerardo and another, both still, both watching Randy with the kind of patience that said we've done this before and we'll do it clean. Randy's hand returned to his side. Lawson looked at Samantha, then at Ryung, then back at Samantha, and in that look was everything, the ownership, the rage, the disbelief that someone would step between him and what he considered his property. "This ain't over," he said. He walked out, Randy followed, the door closed. The bar exhaled. Samantha was on the floor, not because she fell, because her legs stopped working. 3 years of survival instincts had kept her standing, and now that the threat had passed, her body cashed in every debt at once. Ryung walked over, slowly, crouched in front of her, not too close, giving her space, the way you approach someone who's been cornered so many times they flinch at kindness. "What's your name?" he asked. She looked at him through wet eyes. This stranger, this man who had done what no one else had ever done, not the police, not the courts, not her own family. He showed up. "Samantha," she whispered. Ryung nodded. "Samantha, you're safe tonight." 3 words that changed everything, not because they fixed anything, but because she believed them, and she hadn't believed anyone in 3 years. Now here's where most people think the story ends. The hero steps in, the villain backs down, everybody's safe, roll credits. But this story doesn't end here. It doesn't even begin here, because Lawson didn't drive home that night and accept what happened. He drove home and started planning. And the thing about a man who's built his entire identity on controlling one person, when that control breaks, he doesn't shrink. He escalates. Gerardo waited until Samantha was asleep in the back office. Kristen had set up blankets on the couch, locked the door, sat outside it like a sentry before he said what he'd been holding in. "This isn't our problem, Ryung." Ryung was pouring himself tea behind the bar, hands steady. They were always steady. "She's not connected to us," Gerardo continued. "Not family, not business. That man comes back with friends with heat. We've got exposure for 0 return." Ryung sipped, said nothing. "I'm not saying it wasn't the right thing. I'm saying we're not in the business of right things." Ryung set the cup down. "My mother," he said quietly, "used to sleep with a bag packed under the bed." Gerardo went still. Ryung rarely talked about his childhood. The crew knew the basics, born in Seoul, immigrated at 9. Father ran a small gambling operation in Koreatown that eventually became the seed of what Ryung built into something larger, quieter, and far more powerful. But the parts between the lines stayed locked. "Every night," Ryung continued, "a bag with clothes, cash, our documents, under her side of the bed so my father wouldn't find it. She told me if you hear the kitchen chair break, take the bag and go to Mrs. Park's house." He paused. The kitchen chair, because that's what he threw first. Always the kitchen chair. She'd memorized the sequence of his violence so precisely she built an escape plan around the pattern. Gerardo said nothing. "She never left," Ryung said. "Died when I was 14. Heart attack, 39 years old." He looked at Gerardo. Her heart just gave out like it got tired of being afraid. The bar was silent. "That woman in there," Ryung nodded toward the back office, "has the same bag packed. Maybe not a real one, but she's been ready to run for years. And tonight she finally did. I'm not going to be the person who sends her back." Gerardo exhaled, long and slow. "So what's the plan?" "Tomorrow I find her sister, Cynthia, bring the kids, set Samantha up somewhere Lawson can't find her, somewhere off the grid. And when he comes looking, he wills. And..." Ryung picked up his tea. "There are different kinds of dangerous men in this world, Gerardo. The ones who break things, and the ones who build walls around the broken things so they can heal." Gerardo stared at him for a long time. Then he nodded. "I'll make the calls." But even as he said it, Gerardo felt something he'd never felt in 5 years of working with Ryung. Doubt. Not about Ryung's heart, about his judgment, because in their world heart was a luxury, and luxuries got people killed. Ryung set Samantha up in a clean apartment above one of his businesses, a laundromat on a quiet block in Koreatown, far from Lawson's territory. Cynthia brought the kids on a Thursday morning. Samantha held her daughter so tight the little girl laughed and said, "Mommy, you're squishing me." Samantha didn't let go for a long time. Kristen came by every day. At first Samantha thought it was just kindness. Then one evening, sitting on the fire escape while the kids slept, Kristen lit a cigarette and told her the truth. "His name was Derek. 6 years, I thought I loved him. Turns out I just loved the 3 days a month he didn't hit me. She exhaled smoke into the night air. I confused relief with love. Took me 2 years after I left to understand the difference. Samantha was quiet. Ryung found me sleeping in my car behind his bar, Kristen said. 6 years ago, gave me a job, never asked what I was running from, never pushed. She looked at Samantha. He's not a good man by the world's definition, but he remembers what it feels like to be helpless, and he's spent his whole life making sure nobody around him has to feel that way again. And that's the thing about pain. It either makes you cruel or it makes you careful. Lawson's pain made him a predator. Ryung's made him a builder. Same fuel, different engine. What separates them isn't strength or weakness, it's choice. And choice is the only thing that matters. Word spread, not loudly, not publicly, but in the quiet way that survival information travels, whispers at hair salons, notes passed at shelters that were too full, a phone number written on the inside of a matchbook and slipped across a diner counter. Cindy showed up on a Sunday, 22 years old, split lip still swelling, a baby on her hip and a garbage bag of clothes. Kristen answered the door. Cindy was shaking so hard she couldn't speak. Her eyes kept going to the street behind her, checking, scanning, the same survival radar Samantha knew by heart. He's not here, Kristen said gently. You're at the right place. Cindy exhaled and started crying. Not from sadness, from the specific kind of relief that comes when you've been holding your breath for so long you forgot breathing was supposed to be free. Ryung didn't blink. Gerardo set up another apartment. Within a month 5 women, within 2 9. Kristen managed the day-to-day. Gerardo ran security. Ryung funded it through a web of shell companies so clean his own accountant couldn't trace the full picture. They called it the network. No sign, no website, no paper trail, just a system of safe places connected by trust and protected by a man whose other business was far less noble. And in those weeks, Samantha and Ryung began orbiting each other differently. Not romance, something quieter. She'd bring him tea when he worked late. He'd sit with her kids, teaching her daughter Korean words, letting her son climb on his back like a jungle gym. Small things, the kind that build a bridge so gradually you don't notice you're already standing in the middle of it. But across town, Lawson wasn't healing. Lawson wasn't moving on. Lawson was making phone calls. And one of those calls was to a man named John. And if Lawson was a fire, John was the gasoline that had been waiting for a reason to pour. Listen, what's about to happen next is the part of this story that kept me up at night writing it. If you're still here, you already know this isn't an ordinary story. Drop a like on this video right now. It tells the algorithm to show this to more people, and honestly, more people need to hear this one. Now let me tell you about John. John ran a crew out of the Eastside, not as disciplined as Ryung's operation, not as quiet, but bigger, louder and hungry for the blocks Ryung controlled in Koreatown. People who'd done business with both men described the difference the same way. Ryung was a surgeon, John was a sledgehammer. Ryung built systems, John broke into other people's systems and took what was inside. There was a story, maybe true, maybe not, but nobody ever asked John to confirm it, about a shop owner on John's blocks who was 2 weeks late on a payment. John didn't send someone, he went himself, sat in the man's restaurant during the lunch rush, ordered food, ate slowly, left without saying a word. But the next morning the shop owner's car was in pieces in his own driveway, every panel, every window, seats pulled out and stacked on the lawn. John never raised his voice, he didn't have to, the silence was the point. He and Ryung had maintained an uneasy peace for 2 years, the kind of truce that exists not because either side respects the other, but because war is expensive and bad for business. But John had been watching, and what he saw was a young Korean boss getting distracted, pouring money into safe houses instead of operations, pulling soldiers off corners to guard apartments full of women and children. John saw weakness, and in his world weakness wasn't something you pitied, it was something you consumed. When Lawson walked into John's club on a Wednesday night, humiliated, raging, looking for anyone who'd help him reclaim what he considered his, John didn't see a broken man with a domestic problem. He saw a key to a door he'd been trying to open for 2 years. "Your girl," John said, leaning back in his booth, gold chain resting against a black collar, "is being protected by a man I've been waiting for a reason to touch. So here's what we do. You find me the location and I'll make sure you get what's yours." Lawson found it through Cynthia. Randy followed her from her apartment on a Saturday morning. watched her park behind the laundromat, watched her carry grocery bags up a back staircase, watched 2 other women come and go from the same building. Randy called Lawson, Lawson called John. And just like that, the sanctuary had an expiration date. Meanwhile, the fractures inside Ryung's own organization were cracking wider every day. Gerardo brought the latest damage report like a man reading a list of things that couldn't be fixed. We lost the Kim family contract. They went to John because they don't think we're focused anymore. 2 soldiers, men who have been with us 3 years, walked last week, went to John's crew. And the word on the street is that John's about to make a move. This wasn't the philosophical objection from weeks earlier. This was operational, urgent. The ground was shifting under their feet. Nobody tells you this about doing the right thing. It's not free, it's never free. Every good thing you build inside a world that runs on self-interest, you pay for with pieces of the machine keeping you alive. History is full of people who chose conscience over calculation. They're remembered fondly. Most of them are also dead. Reinforce the locations, Ryung said. Double the watch. With what people? We're thin, Ryung, thinner than we've ever been. Ryung closed his eyes. Somewhere in the back of his mind, the kitchen chair breaking, the bag under the bed. Then we get thinner, but nobody touches those women. Gerardo walked out, and for the first time since he'd started this, Ryung felt the weight of everything he'd chosen pressing down on his chest like a hand that wouldn't let go. He'd always known this would cost him. He just hadn't known it would cost someone else more. It happened on a Thursday night. 9:47 p.m. Kristen remembered the time because she just checked the clock, thinking about closing up the supply run at the main safe house, the apartment above the laundromat. Samantha wasn't there. She'd taken the kids to Cynthia's for the night, a small mercy that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Cindy was there, 2 other women, Maria and Jen, and Kristen. The first sound was the back door splintering. Randy came through first, then 2 of John's soldiers. Lawson came last. He always let others go first, brave enough to beat a woman half his size, never brave enough to be the first through a door. Kristen moved faster than anyone expected. She shoved Cindy toward the bathroom, screamed for the others to lock themselves inside, and grabbed the only thing within reach, a fire extinguisher mounted on the hallway wall. She hit the first soldier so hard he dropped in the corridor. But the second one was faster. A blow to the ribs put Kristen on her knees. She looked up. Lawson was stepping over her, heading for the bedrooms, shouting Samantha's name like it was something he owned. "She's not here," Kristen gasped. Lawson turned. The rage on his face was total, directionless, the kind that doesn't need a target, just a radius. "Where is she?" Kristen looked him dead in the eye. "Go to hell." What happened next took less than 10 seconds, and I won't describe it in detail because some violence doesn't deserve a narrator. Some violence just needs a witness. Randy would tell someone months later, in a moment of drunken guilt, that he told Lawson to stop, that he pulled him off, that by the time he did, Kristen's eyes were already closed. She died on the floor of a sanctuary she helped build, a woman who had survived 6 years of her own abuse, who had rebuilt herself from the inside out, who had spent every day since her own escape making sure other women found theirs. Kristen was 31 years old. In the bathroom, Maria held the door shut with her back while Cindy pressed a towel against the cut on her arm, and Jen shielded Cindy's baby with her own body. They stayed like that until the men left. 17 minutes. They counted everyone. Ryung got the call from Gerardo at 10:22. He didn't speak for a long time, sat in his car outside his own bar, phone against his ear, listening to Gerardo describe what they'd found. The broken door, the women in the bathroom, Cindy's wound, Maria's shock. And Kristen on the floor, gone. The woman who'd slept in her car behind his bar 6 years ago. The woman who never asked for anything except a chance to matter. Ryung set the phone down, pressed his palms against the steering wheel, and for the first time in years he broke, not loudly, not dramatically, just a man alone in a dark car crying for a woman who deserved to grow old. It was the last time he would cry for a very long time. When he picked the phone back up, his voice was different, flat, cold, the temperature of steel before it's shaped into a blade. "Gerardo's. Yes. Call everyone, every single one." A long pause. "Was it? No, Ryung said quietly, justice. And here's the thing you need to understand about what happens next. Ryung didn't lose control. That's what makes this different from every revenge story you've ever heard. He got quieter, more precise, more patient. The most dangerous version of Ryung wasn't the one who was angry. It was the one who was calm. There's a difference between a war and a reckoning. A war has two sides, back and forth, casualties on both ends. A reckoning moves in one direction only, down. Ryung moved within 48 hours. First, the money. Gerardo froze every pipeline John's crew used to move cash through Koreatown, 3 laundromats, a check cashing spot, a restaurant on 6 that laundered more than linens, all of it choked off overnight. John woke up Friday morning to find his cash flow wearing a tourniquet. By Friday afternoon his suppliers were calling. By Friday night they stopped calling entirely. Second, the soldiers. Ryung didn't fight John's crew, he bought them. Loyalty built on money has a price tag and Ryung simply offered a higher one. 6 of John's best men walked away in a single weekend, not because they feared Ryung, because Ryung showed them John's real books, proved he'd been skimming from his own people for years. The truth, delivered at the right moment, is more destructive than any weapon. Ryung understood that the way a surgeon understands anatomy. Third, and this was the part nobody expected, Ryung went to the police. Not as a citizen, not as a witness. He went through a lawyer, an anonymous package, documentation of John's operation, supply chains, routes, money, names. Everything Ryung had quietly gathered over 2 years of uneasy peace, tucked away like insurance he always knew he'd eventually need. John's club was raided on a Saturday morning. He was arrested with enough evidence in his own office to guarantee a sentence that would outlast his relevance. Some empires don't get conquered in battle, they get dismantled on paper. But Ryung didn't come for John first. He came for Lawson. Randy they found at a motel off the interstate. Gerardo's men picked him up on Wednesday morning. He was cooperative, the kind of cooperative that comes when a man knows his only 2 options are talk or disappear. Randy gave them everything, confirmed Lawson's role, confirmed John's involvement, and then Gerardo handed Randy a bus ticket and a piece of advice. Pick a direction, don't stop until you run out of road, and if I ever see your face in this city again, I won't hand you a ticket. I'll hand you a shovel. Randy was gone within the hour. Lawson they found at his apartment, alone, sitting on his couch in the dark, a bottle on the table, the television casting blue light across his face. He'd been there for 2 days. Hadn't eaten, hadn't moved, the adrenaline had burned off and what was left underneath was something Lawson had never had to face before. What he actually was. Gerardo and 4 men secured the building. Ryung went in alone. Lawson looked up when the door opened. Something moved across his face, not quite fear, recognition, the understanding that the math he'd been avoiding had finally arrived. You killed her, Ryung said from the doorway. I didn't mean to. You killed a woman whose only crime was standing between you and a door. Lawson stood, even now cornered, outnumbered, finished. His instinct was to make himself bigger, to use his size, the only language he'd ever learned to speak. You don't know me, Lawson said. You don't know what she put me through. Samantha was. She was never yours. Ryung stepped inside and closed the door behind him. Gerardo waited outside. He heard nothing for 7 minutes, no shouting, no impact, no furniture breaking, just silence thick as concrete pressing against the walls. Then the door opened. Ryung walked out, knuckles clean, shirt unwrinkled, face unreadable. But Lawson was still in his chair, and something behind his eyes had changed, like a building whose foundation had been pulled out but hadn't fallen yet, still standing, but hollow. Whatever Ryung said in those 7 minutes, it wasn't a threat. Threats would have bounced off Lawson like rain off asphalt. He'd been threatened his whole life, by cops, by judges, by every man who'd ever squared up to him in a parking lot. This was something else. This was a man who looked straight through every wall Lawson had built around himself and described, calmly, precisely, without emotion, exactly what was on the other side. And what was on the other side was nothing. A man who had to beat women to feel strong, a man whose own child flinched at his voice, a man who had killed someone who weighed 120 pounds and thought it made him dangerous. Ryung didn't break Lawson with his fists. He broke him with a mirror. 2 days later, Lawson walked into a police station. sat down, and confessed to the murder of Kristen, to years of assaulting Samantha, to everything. The officers who took his statement said he spoke in a flat, empty voice, like a man reading his own obituary. They rebuilt in 3 weeks. New locations, new addresses, new security. Gerardo designed a system so layered that even people inside the organization didn't know all the sites. No single point of failure, no trail for anyone to follow. They named it Kristen's. No sign out front, no public record, just a name whispered in the quiet places where women go when they've run out of options. Kristen's, go to Kristen's, you'll be safe at Kristen's. Maria and Jen recovered, were relocated, Cindy stayed, healed, eventually became a coordinator for the network, helping new women arrive the same way Kristen had once helped her. There's a kind of alchemy in that pain transformed into purpose. It doesn't erase the scar, but it gives the scar a story worth telling. Samantha healed the slowest. Grief for Kristen sat on her chest like a stone she carried everywhere. Guilt too, the irrational, unshakable belief that if she'd been there that night maybe she could have stopped it. Maybe Kristen would still be alive. Ryung told her once, sitting on the fire escape where Kristen used to smoke. Survivors always believe they could have changed the outcome. That's not truth. That's the tax your brain charges you for living when someone else didn't. They'd grown close, closer than either of them had planned. There were nights after the kids were asleep, after the city went quiet, when they'd sit in that same spot and talk about everything except what they were both feeling. The space between them on that fire escape was 6 inches wide, and held an entire conversation neither of them was ready to start. But Samantha was honest with herself in a way she hadn't been in years, maybe for the first time ever. She loved him, she knew that. And she knew he loved her not in the loud, possessive way Lawson had, but in the quiet way of a man who asks for nothing and gives everything and is terrified of needing someone because the last person he needed died at 39 with a packed bag she never used. But she also knew what he was. She'd spent 3 years inside one cage. She wouldn't walk into another, no matter how gently the door was held open, no matter how much she loved the man holding it. She told him on a Sunday morning, standing in the doorway of the laundromat, sunlight cutting through the windows for the first time in what felt like months. I have to go, Ryung. He didn't argue, didn't ask her to stay, didn't make promises about changing or getting out. He respected her enough to know she'd already considered every version of that conversation, and none of them ended differently. He just nodded. Where's? Cynthia found a place upstate, small town, good school for the kids, somewhere quiet. He reached into his pocket and handed her an envelope. She didn't open it, but she felt its weight, enough to start over, enough to not need anyone for a long time. You saved my life, she said. He shook his head. You walked into that bar on your own 2 feet, in the rain, with nothing. You saved yourself, Samantha, I just opened the door. She kissed him once, soft, the kind of kiss that holds an entire future that will never happen, the kind you can still feel years later, not on your lips, but in the center of your chest, in the place where almost lives. Then she walked away. Ryung stood in the doorway. The laundromat hummed behind him. The apartment upstairs was empty. The city moved on the way cities do, indifferent, loud, alive. He stood there for a long time. Then he went back inside, because the network didn't sleep, because somewhere in this city right now another woman was walking through the rain, looking for a door, hoping someone on the other side would care enough to open it. Ryung would be there, not because he was a good man, but because somebody had to be. If this story moved you, if Kristen's name is going to stay with you, then share this video. Not for me, for every person out there who needs to hear that someone showed up. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one, and leave a comment, tell me who was the person who showed up for you, or who do you wish had. I read every single one. I'll see you in the next story.